Today I've travelled up to Edinburgh and I'm at the Wake Up Call conference, and I'm honoured to be joined by Lloyd Pye. Welcome, Lloyd.
Thank you.
And we've just finished watching you speak at the conference, and your talk was about the Star Child skull, and we will come on to that. But at first, I'm very interested because I read your book, Everything You Know Is Wrong. I read that about 6 months ago. And that, I mean, it's very controversial, and it provides what you call interventionism, is it? Which is kind of halfway between the two accepted theories of we were created by God and we evolved from apes.
Right.
I guess it's kind of in between. But can you tell us, how did you get interested in anthropology? Because you're not an anthropologist.
Right.
How did you what led you to it?
Well, initially when I was a senior in high school, I read a book about basically Bigfoot, and I got interested in Bigfoot, which is a part of anthropology that's just not dealt with by the mainstream, but you know, they're creatures, and it's fair game for those of us who are willing to expand our minds and go for it. So I became a hominoid researcher, you know, Bigfoot, the abominable snowman. It turns out there are other kinds in the world that most people don't know about but are dominant in other continents. So collectively they're called hominoids, and that was my initial interest, was just that field of research.
Right. And then I guess you educated yourself on a more scientific level after that?
Well, the science, mainstream science, doesn't teach those kinds of subjects. They do everything they can to keep those subjects out of curriculums anywhere. So you have to self-teach yourself. If you want to learn about hominoids, if you want to learn about the forbidden subjects, you just pretty much have to do it yourself.
And you do build a very good case for the fact that there are other hominoids or have been in the past. And you know, I recommend people read that book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, because there's a lot of references in there. Now, your argument is that there was an intervention sometime between 200 and 300,000 years ago, which sparked mankind.
Right.
And as far as I'm aware, there are three broad arguments for that view. The first is that the anthropological record doesn't suggest that we just evolved from apes. Could you expand on that for us, Lloyd, and explain why?
It's not the anthropological record that does that, it's the genetic record.
Right.
Anthropology says that we evolved from a common ancestor with chimps between 5 and 8 million years ago. Somewhere in there was a common ancestor, and humans and chimps branched into their separate species of today. That's what anthropology and zoology and all of that says. However, when geneticists in the middle 1980s rather began to look at mitochondrial DNA and clocking it backwards because they feel that it's something that can give them a timeline on humanity, when they did that, they found that we were about 200,000 years old, not between 8 and 5 million, only 200,000. So that's where our species begins as we are now, as we are today. So science then was in a real quandary because the anthropologists and the geneticists just did not agree on this timeline. So an answer had to be devised to explain away what the geneticists had found and still keep the idea of evolution intact. So what they came up with was what's called the bottleneck, the genetic bottleneck, in which they say sometime prior to 200,000 years ago, all of humankind up to that point in the world was decimated by some unknown kind of catastrophe, leaving only a few breeding pair alive, and those few breeding pair happened to be within reach of each other, so they could continue to have sex and procreate. So that's just, you know, it's an impossible scenario.
So if we draw a tree, branches of a tree, which is mankind sort of spreading his genes and spreading the race, it goes back to a point, and that point is between 200 and 300,000 years ago, and everyone agrees on that.
Right.
But what they don't agree on is whether that was the absolute start, or whether there was some other link to it's actually one branch off another larger branch.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And the argument is, did we in fact begin completely wholly at that point, or did we squeeze through that bottleneck, and prior to that we were something else, but we were very close to human, close enough to human, so that while all of them died out, all that were left were still pretty much the same thing.
Now, that said, you put forward the argument that at that point in time, when the start of that tree, that was the start, that there wasn't this link.
Right. I contend that at 200,000 years ago, we were we were the result of genetic engineering over the course of some particular length of time. I don't know, really can't say how much, but the end product of that genetic engineering is us. And they get the final product around 200,000 years ago, and it begins to spread from that point.
And I believe one of the lines of argument that you use to try and make that point is the fact that our genetic code has errors in it, which other species doesn't.
Right. Species can have genetic flaws, genetic defects. That's not an issue. They don't have nearly as many as we do. We have over 4,000 and counting genetic defects in our gene pool. So if we have a 200,000-year-old gene pool, how do you get 4,000 plus genetic defects? It's just implausible.
Now, when you use the word genetic defect, people will think, oh, someone with an extra finger or something like that.
No, I mean, by genetic defect, there are any number of genetic disorders. Down syndrome is a very common one. Spina bifida is one that everybody knows about. Right. Tay-Sachs disease. There's just lots of them. Right. And any one of those 4,000 can show up in any couple, because each of us carry about 200 of those 4,000 in our gene code. Now, in other words, not every person walks around with 4,000 genetic disorders. We walk around with about 200 each, but collectively in the gene pool itself, there are over 4,000. So it's a function of who you and your partner, when you have children, your 200 approximately disorders, and then whether or not any of your children are going to express any of those.
So what would that figure be in chimps, Lloyd? That equivalent
it would be considerably less. I mean, chimps, for example, gorillas, alligators. I mean, a lot of species have, for example, the genetic defect that causes albinism, causes albinos. So you can have albino chimps, albino gorillas, albino humans, albino alligators, albino birds, a lot of things, all right? So, but that doesn't kill you. That just makes you an albino. It doesn't kill you. So that passes on, you see. But with humans, there are a couple of dozen of our genetic defects that kill you early on, so before you reach puberty, so that you can't possibly have passed it on. So where do these come from, and then how do they get passed into the whole gene pool?
So it's suggesting that it's been messed with, basically.
There's that evidence, and then there's just the physical evidence of our genome showing very clearly that the second and third chromosome in humans that is in primates has been fused. I mean, genetically fused, so that its telomeres on its ends are cut off of the second and the third, and they've been put together in such a way that they still function. And that's extremely unlikely to have occurred naturally. Now, science says, yes, it does, but really it doesn't.
Because human beings have 46 chromosomes. All other primates have 48. Am I right on that?
Well, the higher primates, yeah,
not
the lower primates.
So if we've evolved from them, then at some point we would have dropped or fused those. So you would presume, if you go by the theory of this link, that was when the chromosome must have been dropped.
Exactly. When the two chromosomes were fused, it would be in the time leading up to the actual creation of human beings as we are today, yes.
Now, even if we accept the fact that we all came from this theoretical or actual Eve, which was, let's say it was 200,000 years ago, the anthropologists will say, well, yes, but the population went down to 1 or 2, but they actually evolved from apes. So therefore, if their theory is correct, there has to be an infinite number of, going by Darwinian evolution, an infinite number of adjustments from say 8 million years ago to now, through that, even down through that tree that we call it.
Exactly.
But you've looked at that, the evidence of bones, or either
Right.
fossils or bones, to see whether the anthropological things that people dig up suggest that there is a linear path from, say, 8 million years ago to now.
Right.
What would you say on that?
Well, there is no linear path. There is no linear path anywhere in anthropology. Science tries to pretend that there is, but all you have to do is read a book called Icons of Evolution, and you find out how flawed and how much fraud is involved in that, the mainstream science. But as far as the human, pre-human fossil record, what is called the pre-human fossil record, you have two main groups. You have the Australopithecines, and then you have the early Homos. And the Australopithecines seem to lead into and overlap somewhat the early Homos at around 2 million years ago. Up to there, the Australopithecines are very ape-like looking. They have very, very ape-like heads. Then with the early Homos, it does have a more human-like head. The early Australopithecines have these big, wide cheekbones, and very different than what we have. So in the early Homos, the cheekbones are down. So there's a real transition point at about 2 million years ago. Something happens, and what existed before is modified into something, and very dramatically too. It isn't. There's no gradualism, no Darwinism, any of that. And then suddenly you have Homos looking very different. But nonetheless, they are still very primate looking. They have big round night vision eyes. They have widely splayed noses that probably go, their nasal openings, noses flat across their face. They have mouths that stick off their face in the primate prognathous fashion. They have no chins. They have foreheads. They have big heavy brow ridges. They have foreheads that go back from those brow ridges. So they, in every way, for the next 2 million years, up to Cro-Magnons, you have that particular look with the brains growing bigger. So there's no evolution there. There's no change. It's dramatic overhauls, like overnight.
So there's no gradual set of skulls where the brow ridges gradually diminish to what we have.
That collectively science calls the missing link. And they just keep insisting that they're going to find the missing link someday, because it has to be there for their theory to be true. But in fact, there is no missing link. They haven't ever found one, and they're not going to find one. They keep saying they do, but they never do.
So this would be probably something about between 500,000 and 1 million years old, would you say? Let's just hypothesize that they're going to find it. That's the kind of age we're talking about.
Well, it would have to be somewhere between or around the transition from Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon, because it's so dramatic. Now, this is why Neanderthal is so important to science, because it's important for them to say in any way that they can that Neanderthals are very human-like. And so they spend a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to prove how human-like Neanderthals are, when in fact they're very little human-like, if human-like at all. They're really not. So I argue that in the end, Neanderthals are going to prove to be much more primate than human. Science needs them to be much more human than primate in order for evolution to look remotely like it's happening. So Neanderthals are kind of a swing vote here, although all you have to do is look at a Neanderthal physiologically and see that it really has no human bones in it at all. It's just Neanderthals are pre-human, yes, but they are primate much more than they are human. When Cro-Magnons appear, humans appear, and everything about them is different, everything compared to Neanderthals.
All right. Now, your contention that we were genetically engineered around about 200,000 years ago sort of got a boost really from probably an unexpected area of research, which was Zecharia Sitchin's work.
Right.
Can you tell us when you found out about Sitchin's work, and when it was that you realized that this is possibly supporting your case?
Right. I had been working for almost 20 years on hominoids, and what I knew from my research of hominoids and pre-humans, what we were just talking about, is that from Neanderthal back, all of those creatures were not pre-humans. They were the ancestors of living hominoids today. Again, Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, two other kinds dominantly around the, other parts of the world. But hominoids live on all continents except Antarctica. They're very numerous. I know people are, when they hear that, they're shocked because science works very hard to make Bigfoot and all that seem silly and, you know, not worth consideration. But the truth is, evidence is overwhelming that they're real, they're out there, and it's just another whole part of my work. Take my word for it, though, that the prehumans represent the ancestors of the hominoids. So that leaves nothing for humans in the flowchart of life on Earth. We just suddenly appear. I didn't know where we came from. I had no idea. I couldn't find anything that scientifically satisfied my level of need for something that I could defend until I read Zecharia Sitchin's work in about 1990. And as soon as I read The 12th Planet, I said, that's what I've been needing. That's the answer. Because while I could say that humans didn't evolve on Earth, that Earth belonged to the hominoids, and I couldn't say when or how we came here. I didn't really understand that. Sitchin's work gave me the understanding I needed, and so I saw that I could fuse his work and my work and make something original and important, and that's what I did.
And Sitchin died very recently, an expert in ancient languages, and he studied Sumerian stone tablets, which had a vast amount of information, and some people say it's fiction, some people say it's actually,
right, exactly.
And that's the main contention with his work. Is it just a story, or is it an actual record of what happened?
Right, exactly. The mainstream likes to say that the Sumerians were writing mythology, making things up, but, you know, Sitchin said, how could they make up what they're writing with? They're writing with such specificity. They're talking about things that are just absolutely unacceptable to mainstream science. For example, they knew where Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were long before anybody could possibly have known, because you can't see them. And they knew they were there. They themselves said that they created humans to be their slaves and their servants, the Anunnaki, from the planet that Nibiru, that is supposedly, according to the Sumerians, a part of our solar system. So everything that the Sumerians were writing relative to how humans came to be here, how domesticated plants and animals came to be here, and understand that there's as much genetic tampering with domesticated plants and animals as there is with human beings. So this whole plethora of things that we just accept as natural to the earth were not. They were created here.
And the Anunnaki that the stone tablets speak of were supposedly here possibly a few 100,000 years before man was created. So they were maybe occupying our planet for whatever reason.
Well, the tablets say about 350 to 400,000 years ago, so they could have as much as 150 to 200,000 years here before they felt a need to create us, yes.
And tell us what that need was, Lloyd.
The need to create us was that they were few and they had a big job to do. They were collecting gold. They needed a lot of gold to repair their atmosphere. Again, this is according to the writings of the Sumerians, to correct their atmosphere, which had been damaged in their rise to a high technology. And so they need gold, it turns out, is the thing we'll need to repair our atmosphere with when the day ever comes. Gold is a wonderful reflector, and it reflects harmful rays, but it's also a good insulator as well. So particulated gold in the form of like talcum powder, blown up into the stratosphere so it'll float over the surface of the air and stay up for quite a while. That's just what they needed, so they came to get it.
But Homo sapiens themselves, we were to be their servants or their slaves.
We were created to be their slaves and their servants, to do their mining, to do, you know, just take care of them. They're like 600 people, 600 beings here living on Earth doing all this work. They need help. They need, and most of them are male, so they need help and they need women. So, you know, they make your own kind of thing.
So do you go along with the theory that they actually kind of suppressed certain abilities in themselves and used their own genetics when they created man?
Well, I don't think they created anything within themselves, but they took their genes and then they did, I think, manipulate to make the slave and the servant. They took what they gave us. I mean, I think we're essentially them. We're not primates. We're essentially them.
Right.
So in doing that, they dumbed us down. You don't want your slave or your servant to be as intelligent as you are by any stretch. You don't want it even as close, or live as long. Exactly, that's another thing. You want them to be expendable. You want them to be parts of the machine. So when you come down to our intelligence, they had to really dumb us down. If we've got their brains in our heads, and it's clear that we do, we have a brain that's totally unlike any other higher primate, totally in every way. So let's assume we have their brain in our head. If we do, and I believe that we do, then we have a phenomenal tool in our heads. So they just denied access to us of most of the firepower that they were giving us. So that while we sit here talking, you and I, and we think, well, we're really smart guys, the fact is that compared to the Anunnaki, we're toadstools. I mean, we're just really, really bad. And you, I think, can prove that easily enough by looking at the work of savants and what savants can do. Savants are people that in the damage to their good part of their brains that you and I are using, they get an arrow of light, a shaft of light into the forbidden part. In the tear in the curtain that causes their mental disability, they get a light into the forbidden part. And that light into the forbidden part produces the phenomenal abilities of savants. And you've got over 100 savants that have been known and studied in history. We have several who are alive today, and they have these incredible abilities with music and art and sculpture and memory and just incredible works. So if there were one or two of those, you could write it off as a freak of nature. But since we're talking 100 plus, we have to look at that as a phenomena. And what that means is they are accessing parts of a brain that we have. I could, if I could find a way, if I could drop that curtain that the Anunnaki put in my head, if you could drop your curtain, we would suddenly have all of the access that savants have and then some. They're only getting a narrow band of light. Imagine if you could access the whole thing that has to do with language and art and math. We can just go on. They have the savants have such a wide range of skills. We could all have that, and I believe that in the next 50 to 100 years we'll get it because we're getting so sophisticated with our genetic manipulation. Once we get past the moral issues of making ourselves better, if you could say to a wealthy person, you know, give me a few $1 million and I will produce a kid for you, and I will produce a kid for you that will be the smartest human being that ever lived. Somebody's going to do it.
Yeah.
And before you know it, we'll all be that way.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Well, through the sort of 80s and 90s, you were interested in anthropology and you wrote the book Everything You Know Is Wrong. What year did that come out, Lloyd?
It came out in late 97, basically 98.
Now, after that time, you've been on the last decade, you've been on a roller coaster, really.
Right. Yeah.
Because MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, contacted you because they had an artifact or a relic, whatever you want to call it, the skull that you were given, or two skulls that you were given.
Right.
Obviously, we've just listened to you give an hour and a half lecture on this, and you probably didn't even scratch the surface in that lecture.
Right.
So for the 5 or 10 minutes that we've got, give us the salient points of it, Lloyd. What's the significance of it, and what tests have you had done on it?
Well, I should mention that MUFON itself, the organization, had nothing to do with it. Ray and Melanie Young, who were individual people, were members of MUFON, but they acted and all that they did had nothing to do with MUFON itself. So I want to be clear about that. The Star Child skull is a real, true bone skull. Nobody doubts what it is. Many, many scientists have gone over it, and nobody assumes that it's any kind of a fake or a fraud or things cobbled together. It's the real deal. So it's a real, true bone skull. But its physiology is completely different from a human skull. I mean, everything. 25 major differences and several minor differences. So we're talking about something unseen on Earth before. The Star Child skull is one of a kind. It's very unique, and all of those different physiological parts come from getting different DNA instructions than what we have. So the Star Child is ultimately going to be able to be proven to be a human-alien hybrid, and that's what we're in the process of trying to do, is prove that with genetics.
And the skull itself is approximately 900 years old because it's been carbon dated.
Carbon dated, right.
And just to touch on the two physical anomalies which make it different from any other skull, there's the fibers and there was two in your lecture, Lloyd. Just remind us of what they were.
Fibers and the red residue. Well, those two things are not found in any other species on Earth. The fibers that are woven through the matrix of the bone and the red residue that was left behind in the cancellous holes of the bone. So we have no real understanding of what those are, where they could have come from, and we won't be able to know that until we have the finances available to develop the protocols to test these things, because it's very microscopic in size.
So because the skull itself is much thinner than a human skull. What's approximately the thickness of a human skull?
Well, a human skull is about like that. The bone is about like that,
right.
And the star child is about like that.
So
it's half to less than half.
Right, right. And it's equivalent in strength, or stronger? Or?
The star child is 2 or 3 times stronger, much harder, because the star child bone is it's much more like tooth enamel than bone. If you look at its biochemistry and you analyze its biochemistry, it is substantially different. It has much more collagen. It's very, very heavy, overloaded in collagen. And collagen is what adds to hardness. When you drill your teeth, that smell that you smell is burning collagen. And the star child is just choked with extra collagen, much more than our bones have.
Mm-hmm. All right. And people can find information on your website about the Star Child skull.
StarChildProject.com, right.
Mm-hmm.
www.starchildproject.com, and you can find out all about it. And I would urge you to, read that. Don't go to Wikipedia, because that's just, what they say about it is just garbage. Go to the site. You can read the Wikipedia article, and you can read the truth underneath all the lines that they write.
Now, some of the DNA testing has shown that the mother is human,
right?
But you're getting or you've recently had tests done, which is that on the father's DNA.
Right.
So what has that shown, Lloyd?
Well, initially we were able to show in 203 that the mother was indeed human. We got her mitochondrial DNA, so we know that the star child's mother was a human female. When we tried to recover its nuclear DNA, which comes from its mother and its father, we couldn't even get close to an answer. In 6 full attempts, there was just no answer. So something was really wrong with the father at that point. That's what we thought. Earlier this year, we got a geneticist who agreed to do more work, do more analysis, and what he's found is that, yes, the star child's mother is human, but in its nuclear DNA, which he was able to recover, you have part of it that is human, again, human mother, and part of it is not found on Earth, not found in the NIH database for sure, which means not found on Earth. So we have a very, very small sample right now relative to the whole 3 billion genome that we have to recover. We only have at this point maybe 30,000 base pairs. It's enough to be indicative, to be highly indicative, but it's not enough to be definitive. And science will not accept anything but definitive. So we're going to have to ultimately sequence the whole chromosome, which is okay. We have the capacity to do that if we get the money. So this is really all about getting the money that we need to do the research that we need to do to recover that genome and establish what the percentage of difference the star child had from a human. At this point, early on, we think it's going to fall somewhere between 10 and 50%, which is really astounding because a chimp is only about 3% different and a gorilla is about 5% different. The star child's, we think, is going to be between 10 and 50% different. So it's truly astounding, and it's historic. It's as historic as landing men on the moon. This is a very important thing that's going on in the world, and most people don't know about it.
Okay. All right, just one final question, Lloyd. I've done a lot of research into the UFO phenomenon, and I'm aware of what we call the abduction phenomenon. And there are, for example, I interviewed Mary Rodwell, who's an Australian researcher, and she's regressed or researched about 1,700 cases, and they all tell a very similar story. So people poo-poo the abduction phenomenon because people seem to have their memories tampered with.
Right.
Now, you mentioned in your lecture as well that women are often taken, so is revealed under regression, and they are made pregnant, and they are shown their offspring at some later time. So do you think that this could be a very early incidence of this kind of harvesting, the skull that you have?
Well,
could it be an abduction program from 900 years ago?
I thought about that. I really did at first. I thought it's what we all thought, that it was just a human-alien hybrid. But those hybrids, however they are made, could very well be, the Star Child could very well be one of them. Mm-hmm. But the people that see the hybrids afterwards, the women are generally allowed to see their hybrid children, and they all say it seems to be more human. It's not human entirely, but it seems to be more human than anything else, although they look substantially different. Now, based on the Star Child, we won't know till we see the skull of one of those, but based on the Star Child, the physiology of the Star Child is very, very different from human. So while it could be the result of one of those, it could as likely be something else that we just don't know about. Right now, I'm not leaning toward toward it being a human-alien hybrid of the current era, of the current way that they're harvested, because they just seem more human than the Star Child. I think it's something else. I'm not sure. I can't swear to it.
And I'd just like to ask you, because of obviously you've self-educated yourself in genetics, in anthropology, all these different areas, and you're also well clued up on the UFO subject. What's your own feeling on the agenda and the purpose for abduction and the genetics program that once you research it, you realize is going on? What are they trying to do?
Well, I think probably just based on the idea that when you make a hybrid, in most cases they're sterile. Like for example, a mule and a horse produce a donkey. I mean, a mule rather. A donkey and a horse produce a mule, and the mule is sterile. Yeah. So probably these hybrids are the result of something that becomes sterile, and so they have to keep making more to supply them wherever those beings are living, whatever planet, whatever their purpose is in life. They need to make more all the time because they can't reproduce themselves. Now, why that is, I don't know, because if we were made such that we could reproduce ourselves, I don't know why those can't be made so that they can reproduce themselves. Right. But I'm just giving you an answer to what seems to be the evidence. All right then, Lloyd.
It's a very sort of quick snapshot of your work. I appreciate it, but tell us about your other books. Obviously, there's the Star Child book.
Right. There's the Star Child book, and those are really the things that people in this field would be interested in. I don't think people would be interested in my novels, but there's Everything You Know Is Wrong is the book about what we were talking about earlier, human origins and hominoids, and the Star Child skull, or the Star Child skull ebook, are the books that deal with the Star Child, and all of those are available. Mm-hmm.
And if and when this is accepted by mainstream, what's going to change on our planet?
Everything. Everything. I think that when disclosure, I think that right now you and I have lived in what's called the post-war era. I think that World War II was a defining time, and everything since then has been called post-war. Right. I think that the next big phase of existence for all of us is going to be post-disclosure, because it's going to lift everybody's game to a very different and higher level, because when we start accepting that we're not the only game in town, it will, I think, develop some humility in us. We'll just have to become a little bit more humble about our origins, and it will just create a different mindset from which I think a lot of good things can happen.
All right then, Lloyd. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Richard, for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we do it again sometime.
Okay. Thank you.